Hey everyone, we are so excited to welcome you to our first ever episode for the Sports Medicine Podcast. My name is Maddie Portland and my co-host is Haley Karpik. Haley, before we get into logistics, here's the weekly intro question that you and I have had literally forever to think about. If you were a professional baseball player in the MLB, what would your walk-up song be?
Ooh, this is a great question. And I thought about this a lot since we've been chatting for the past few weeks. Also, I will say this is like my go-to get to know somebody question. Also like a great first date question. So put it in your back pocket. Good like icebreaker too. I think mine would be, and it's changed recently. I changed it to, Welcome to the Jungle, I think is my go-to walk up just because it's hype and it's like kind of has a crazy intro.
Classic.
It gets me hype, but I also think it would get the crowd hype. And my walk-up song would be a crowd pleaser. I think you can do either like a personal favorite song that gets you going or a crowd pleaser. And I'm a people pleaser, so we're going the crowd pleaser route and playing a banger. What's yours?
So similar. I think I went with a crowd pleaser as well. I chose Can't Stop by the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
A good one.
And the reason I chose that is because I have this core memory of my grandpa bringing me to one of my first Cubs games. And, he's doing like a beer every inning. And during
As
that
you
time,
should.
Right. And during that time, he bought me like 2 or 3 things of cotton candy. And I only needed one, but I probably consumed all 3. And hearing that song, made me like start jumping around, especially during like the
It got the cotton candy going.
Yeah, exactly. And then I got sick once the game ended. Yeah, I threw up. So still a great song. And yeah, that's why I chose it. So now before we move in to getting into like the details and the nitty-gritty, unfortunately we can't play any of this music because of licensing rules, but I do think if we have like guests on, this should be the question that we ask them, and then we'll
I think that's a good one.
Playlist.
Yeah.
And then it'll be like hopefully really good.
Yeah.
Like once
I think it's a good question as a thinker, and it's like a personality. I feel like you can get something about their personality. I like that. Yeah. I like that. We can create a good playlist for it.
Okay, cool.
Smart.
Cool. All right.
So yeah, I guess I can kind of dive into like, this is episode 1. I can kind of go into what this podcast is going to be all about and what we're going to be discussing. So this podcast will mostly cover sports adjacent topics, and our hot takes. We love watching sports, and there's a ton of women who also, do as well, and not just women, but people in general. I think we're trying to create an environment where all fans of sport can come, hang out, either laugh with us or at us as we work to provide kind of a unique take that may be a little bit different than like your typical sports podcast. Like, I think we're trying to take a little bit different of a route, maybe a little bit more chill, definitely a lot less educated than like your normal sports podcast. So that's kind of the route we're taking. In terms of like how episodes will look in the future, Maddie and I will be providing you a weekly dose of a cool story, topic, interview, or bio that is sports related and that that the listeners want to discuss. So if you guys have topic ideas, feel free to let us know. But did you like what I did there with that pun, that weekly dose, sports medicine podcast? That was har.
That was super creative, Haley.
Yeah, that was a good one. And then kind of going into what this podcast doesn't discuss. It doesn't discuss medicine or medical advice. I will say today we talked briefly about medicine, but again, like very surface level. Disclaimer, we're not medical doctors. Funny enough, I am a pharmacist, so technically I do have a doctorate of pharmacy, but that doesn't get me very far. And Maddie has a bachelor's in pharmaceutical sciences, and that's kind of how like the name of the podcast came to be. We met each other during college, and we worked in group projects and classes together, and now we both work in pharma. And so this podcast title is just kind of like an inside joke. And yeah, we just want to state up front that everything we discuss in this podcast is our opinions of Maddie and myself. They shouldn't be used to make any sort of medical decision. We're not providing medical advice. You don't want to take medical advice from us. We don't know what we're talking about
in general.
Or maybe advice in general. You're right. That's a good disclaimer all around. Just everything we say, not just a grain of salt, maybe like half the shaker. But yeah, our bottom line is like, these are our opinions and our opinions only. So yeah, that's kind of ground rules of the podcast. Anything I missed?
No, I don't think so, Haley.
Awesome.
I think we're good to go. So
there we go.
I figured I would ease us into this podcasting world. And I know we just spent the last 5 minutes explaining to everyone that this is not a medical podcast, and that is still true. However, for this first episode, I figured we would play to our strengths, and also maybe to provide a little bit of irony, we're going to be discussing the topic of performance-enhancing drugs, or PEDs. So we're going to kind of get into the history of them, how they work, and then we also want to talk about why we think that their use is decreasing overall in professional sports. So sources for our discussion today are found in the show notes. And then, so kind of to get right into it. So it appears from my research that PEDs were actually first introduced in the most primitive form of competition, war. So Scandinavian mythology says combatants known as berserkers could drink a mixture called butotens to greatly increase their physical power. But this would come at the risk of insanity and death. And this is thought to have been prepared using the Amanita muscaria mushroom. Major toxins in this mushroom are thought to be the ilbotanic acid and muscimol. These substances are structurally related to each other, as well as glutamic acid and GABA. Now, Haley knows a lot more about those two things, glutamic acid and GABA, than me and the rest of our listeners. But to put it in sort of simple terms that Haley can check me on, glutamic acid and GABA are super important neurotransmitters found in our body that are crucial for normal neuronal activity. So they help our brain and muscles and really entire body function normally. So when these toxins are acting in place of glutamic acid or GABA, that's what's thought to cause the agitation, delirium, insanity that these combatants experienced. Haley, did I miss anything there?
No, that's pretty good. It's like you have a degree in pharmaceutical sciences or something.
Yeah, I know, right?
Good job.
Cool. Okay, so moving on from that, other honorable mentions of PED use during war include the intake of liquid courage, which, as some people know, is the consumption of alcohol. This is cited by Wikipedia as a factor that caused Russia to actually lose the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. Survivors of this war apparently said that Russian soldiers were drunk the majority of the time in battle, which is just
why did they think that would work?
Yeah, I don't know.
Besides the courage aspect, give me enough drinks and I'm falling asleep.
Really, that is like the question I was asking, like even up above too, like with like the Scandinavian mythology, like once 4 or 5 people like lose their mind on mushrooms, like I'm really shocked that someone was like, hey, you know what? This doesn't work.
Let's take a step back.
Yeah.
Maybe let's not.
Yeah. Instead, it seems like in both these cases, they were like, oh, we just didn't take enough. We just need more, and then
we just need to get drunker.
Yeah, right. So, so we know in certain amounts, alcohol can, decrease your like
inhibitions.
Yeah. So I think that's what they're talking about. But then, of course, it also makes you sleepy. Upsets your balance.
You're not as coordinated. I feel like there's a lot of things that
problem
could
solving skills are impacted.
Yeah.
Ton of things that I think you would need for a war. Anyway.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So. Okay. Then amphetamines such as cocaine and others have their moment when the world wars start to take place. And these were given to soldiers in an attempt to increase alertness, suppress appetite, and decrease fatigue. And I thought the suppress appetite thing was interesting and maybe accidental, but it was actually purposeful because during the World War, everyone was starving and there wasn't enough food to go around. So they would purposefully give soldiers amphetamines so they wouldn't have to like provide as much food to everyone. Isn't that wild?
That's an interesting tactic.
Like,
That kind of makes sense. Yeah.
I know,
But
kind of
also
makes
like
sense, but like kind of
kind of messed up. But yeah.
Okay. So, and then apparently this specific choice of PED was favored by Nazi Germany. So although some scientists suggest that Hitler his mental state towards the end of World War II could be associated with heavy steroid use as well. So like he was using both.
He was juicing. Hitler was juicing. Wow.
Yep.
Add it to the list of things. Like
yeah, right. So Sports Illustrated and the History Channel cite, his mania, acute paranoid psychoses, aggressive and violent behavior, depression, and suicidal ideologies as being possibly related to steroid use. So just to be clear, I'm not removing responsibility of how awful a person Hitler was or how awful a regime the Nazis were. But it is fascinating to think these sorts of substances were causing similar chaos and destruction inside the German human body as they were causing like this chaos and destruction on the front lines of the wars. So yeah, kind of food for thought.
Yeah.
And then furthermore, moving through time, an article in The Atlantic titled "The Drugs That Built the Super Soldier" stated, quote, "During the Vietnam War, the U.S. military supplied its servicemen with speed, steroids, and painkillers to help them handle extended combat," end quote. These so-called pep pills were said to be administered with little to no oversight of strength of dose or frequency of the administration, making overdoses common. Again, this lack of oversight, research into harmful effects of these substances on the body, and individuals or groups' refusal to take responsibility for providing or consuming these substances all diffuses over into sports too.
Wow.
Okay. So doping or using a substance to illegally improve athletic performance and then the invention of the sports we consume today really do happen simultaneously. So a quick disclaimer, Haley knows this, but for others, I'm well aware that a major piece of the performance enhancing drug history, especially in cycling, surrounds Lance Armstrong circa 2012. If any of our listeners are interested in this topic, I encourage you to research this on your own time. If I talk about specifically blood doping for more than this sentence, I will get lightheaded and pass out on this podcast and then probably start convulsing.
That could be entertaining, but
we're going to say
we don't need that.
Say no. Yeah. So needles and IVs associated with blood work specifically are not my thing. So for our purposes of this present day discussion and my own health and safety, I will highlight other key events that sort of propel us into the current day. Okay. So the year's 1896. And 24-year-old Welsh cyclist Arthur Linton dies approximately 2 months after he wins an infamous race from Bordeaux to Paris. The cause of death is reported as typhoid fever, but many speculate that he had taken trimethyl or strychnine before the race. And this is cited in Sports Illustrated as well as Wikipedia. Strychnine is a stimulant, so the mechanism of action, and again, Haley, check me on this, works by antagonizing the neurotransmitter glycine. Think of a neurotransmitter such as glycine as a chemical messenger in the body. So normally in the brain and spinal cord, glycine works as an inhibitory neurotransmitter, meaning it binds to a receptor on your nerve cells and then inhibits neuronal firing. This would inhibit your muscles from contracting. So when a person is exposed to strychnine, the drug binds in place of glycine and blocks uptake into the brain and spinal cord receptors. This equates to the motor neurons being more easily activated, which then causes muscle contractions, and then ultimately death by asphyxiation as the muscles around the lungs and heart tire. Haley, from a pharmacist's perspective, how'd I do on that?
That was
And
great.
clinically, how does this look?
Yeah, I'll add a few things. You explained it great. That's how it works to a T. So, yeah, it's a basically strychnine is an alkaloid, taken from the seeds of trees. It's commonly used like as a poison. You'd see it in a bait for like a rat trap or something like that. Exposure can be fatal, and in the 19th and 20th centuries, it was used as a performance enhancer for its convulsant effects, like you talked about its impact and how it leads to muscle contraction. They kind of thought it was similar to like giving you a buzz, like drinking a cup of coffee would, like give you that energy, that jolt, which is why it was used, and kind of like its role in the performance enhancing space. There really was no evidence around that, but that was kind of their thought. And you kind of talked about how it leads to like muscle contraction issues around the whole body. Like at higher doses, it's really rapid onset and it can cause that respiratory failure and death as soon as 15 to 30 minutes. So it's very toxic, not good for you. No, and really no proof that it actually would work or benefit, but like the thought around it, what they thought was like that contraction of muscle, that buzz, that like jolt that it would potentially give you could be used as a benefit in competition. But yeah, there's no evidence. And as you said, it just doesn't like it basically causes your body to like shut down completely. So not a good way. And the people who would like, you talk about the guy who used it, like he stumbled across the finish line and like was delirious, wasn't making any sense, and never competed again. And so it wasn't like something that was really working great, nor did it have any evidence to support it. And it was literally rat poison. So kind of an interesting scenario there.
Yeah. It was a swing and a miss, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. To say the least. Yeah. And no cup of coffee. Like, why don't you drink a cup of coffee if you're looking for that buzz? But yeah, I wasn't there in 1896 to tell them no. So
all right. So kind of, I don't want to say trial and error, but like that's kind of what it was. Stimulants are getting more maybe advanced would be the right word to use, right? Instead of effective. They're advancing. Yeah. So then in 1967, again, we're talking about cycling, and sports where endurance or stamina are like really important. So in 1967, Tom Simpson passes away during the Tour de France. According to the History Channel, he collapsed as he pedaled up Mont Ventoux on an extremely hot day. Simpson's cause of death was listed as a heart attack due to dehydration. However, there were tubes of amphetamines in his jersey, and an autopsy found traces of amphetamines in him as well. Do you know, Haley, random question, do you know where they would look for that? Is that just in a blood test that they're running?
Yeah. Like
is there like an organ that they're extracting?
No, they would just probably look in a blood test. Yeah, you could see those. Those would show up in like in a blood test.
Yeah.
Like if you did a blood test for work, you would like an amphetamine would show up.
Yeah, it would pop up.
That's why like if you take like Vyvanse or like Adderall normally like on prescription, you have to like tell people when you're going in for a drug test that because they would show up in something like that. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, found traces of amphetamines. And, I picked these two instances because I find it, fascinating that as early as 1896, then a lot later in 1967, and now even, of course, in the present day, there is sort of this need to cover up or hide the use of these substances from the public. And that definitely impacted my research into the episode today. It was very difficult to find like what athletes were suspended for what substance use. Historically, I feel like we've gotten the most information from the MLB and the Olympics agencies, but other organizations seem to be a bit more tight-lipped. Okay, so we've discussed shrooms and sort of natural PEDs. We've talked about amphetamines, and now I want to get into steroids, specifically anabolic steroids. So in 1889, apologies also for the quick jump back in time, but I'm sort of setting a scene here. A French
Painting a picture.
Yeah, if you will. A French physician by the name of Charles-Édouard Brown-Séquard, who was 72 years old at the time, extracted testicular fluid from dogs and guinea pigs and injected it into himself. He announced his findings at a scientific meeting in Paris, claiming to feel years younger with renewed energy. This man is cited as being an incredible physician for the time because he grew up and made several advancements that would lead us to the modern understanding that we have today for neuroscience and endocrinology. However, that is still gross.
Yeah. He's got a
curious
mind, though.
Yeah.
I respect that.
Yeah.
That's kind of gross.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
That is gross.
Yeah.
As a woman living in 2023, I do not often agree with media takes of the 1800s, but I was able to find a Vienna medical publication from 1889, and they just absolutely flamed this physician, and I agree with them. They said, quote, "The lecture must be seen as further proof of the necessity of retiring professors who have attained their 10 years." So basically,
they were showing him the door.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
which is funny. So in all seriousness, though, this sort of rudimentary science would lay the groundwork for the anabolic steroids of testosterone that were and are commonly used by weightlifters, baseball players, other athletes prior to and during the 2000s. And then the mechanism of action of a steroid is a bit complex. So I tried to put this in super simple, high-level terms, but testosterone itself enhances muscle mass by increasing muscle protein synthesis, which seems kind of obvious, but the way in which it does that is kind of varied, and there's different pathways. So I didn't feel like really getting into that.
Yeah. I think people know. I think,
Yeah, you get the gist.
Yeah. Like,
you take them,
makes
your
you
muscles
bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, there's a lot of other negative things. We'll get into that too.
For sure. Yeah, it's not strictly positive, but
yeah. So in 2003, the Bulko scandal begins, and this has to deal with the designer steroid THG. I'm not going to try and pronounce the
yeah, no need to. It's a lot of letters.
We tried that yesterday, and it did not work. Okay, so designer steroid THG. This was undetectable to tests and was produced and distributed by the Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative, or Bulko, and it's specifically its founder, Victor Conti, was said to be involved in this distribution. Athletes involved in the scandal, of course, include baseball players such as Barry Bonds, Jason Giambi, Gary Sheffield, among others. So 10 years later, a disgruntled employee by the name of Porter Fisher would bring down the entire company he worked for, the Biogenesis Clinic, which was, distributing these PEDs, located in South Florida. And by bringing down this company, he also brought down some of the MLB's biggest stars of the time, including Alex Rodriguez and Ryan Braun, which is just wild.
Like,
this middle-class dude.
I get mad at work too, but I don't know if I'd ever get that mad.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, he's also kind of doing the right thing. I don't know. That's one disgruntled employee.
So
I feel him sometimes.
Apparently, obviously, any one of these stories could be just an episode all in of themselves, but apparently the MLB did there's documentaries that you can watch where the MLB did really shady stuff and shady interview practices to retrieve this information on this whole scandal too.
Oh no way.
So
interesting.
There's I don't know, there's villains on both sides almost.
Yeah.
It seems it was just a very not good situation.
Yeah.
But anyway, So most notably, the clinic was known for providing athletes PEDs, including human growth hormone, and then the designer steroid I was talking about above as well. So Haley, one last time, can you explain to all of us the difference between these different steroids and why these athletes were consuming them?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just start out with like basic testosterone. I think it's what most people would think of as the male hormone. Women have testosterone too, just in different proportions to men. But both men and women, it helps with growth, maintenance and repair of tissues, impacts bone mass, and also impacts human behavior. In men, it's essential to the development of like male growth, masculine characteristics, all that good stuff. So yeah, testosterone is like, again, we have it all in our bodies. You can also inject it and it'll just do more of what it's intended, what our bodies have it intended to do. So it'll build mass, things like that. THG, the other one you mentioned, the synthetic, it's truly a designer steroid. It was the first of its kind, and the purpose of its creation was truly to hide detection. They could tell, like in blood tests, if you were using testosterone, but this was just to like this whole purpose. Some chemist out there was like, oh, I can make this to evade drug test detection, so these people can still get the benefits without getting in trouble. So it's a chemical very similar to steroids. It acts basically the same as testosterone, binds to the same receptors, honestly even better than normal testosterone, has really a high affinity to the receptor. So yeah, it's just like really good testosterone. And it, again, the whole purpose of its creation was for illegal use to avoid detection by, these governing agencies and bodies that were drug testing. So it's interesting, like the origin of it. Like some chemists out there was like, oh, I can tweak some things around and make this better and also make them not get in trouble, and did it. So really interesting. Yeah.
Like you and I have even a little bit more insight into this than normal, but like how, oops, sorry, I keep hitting my mic. How did this like chemist like get the okay to like,
yeah, like where was he
like
operating
clinical trials and like administer that? Like what like unmet need did he sell his board of directors or whatever to be like, hey, you know what we really need? An undetectable designer steroid.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, I don't even know how he made it or how he like started this crazy. Or like how they went from like, they made this and then how did they distribute it or make it in large quantities. It's a really good question. But yeah, no, it's interesting. And I think, kind of a sign of the times where they, it was like they wanted to have performance enhancing substances, but knew that they were testing and could get caught. So they did a little workaround in the lab and figured this out. So very interesting on the THG. And then there's, again, in addition to those two, there's HGH, which kind of is more similar to testosterone. It's naturally produced by the body in both males and females. It's made in the brain. It stimulates growth, especially in the production of cells. So you can see from like a, performance enhancing, it increases the production of cells, can make you bigger, stronger, all that good stuff or bad stuff. So yeah, the use of HGH in sport is to build muscle. It communicates, and again, naturally in your body, it communicates your body to grow. It's very high levels during puberty, which makes sense because you're growing a lot. Its use in sport is big because it's efficient. It's harder to detect than some of the other ones. It lacks some of the major side effects, all while increasing muscle mass and power. So end goal, you still get the same, but you have fewer side effects. So it's another one that's commonly used, in performance enhancing, but again, it's natural, similar, your body produces it similar to it does produce testosterone.
Okay. And all of them would also have similar side effects to what we talked about above, right? In terms of like rage, mania.
Yeah, exactly. Like they would have similar, like again, that's a good point. Like these do have side effects, and they're not just like, you're not just building muscle mass with no consequences. Like there is a payoff in these, like, and there's our side effects that you kind of like typically think of, like roid rage and like things like that. And so, they're not just out there getting you jacked without having some negative consequences. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of figured, but yeah, always good to restate those kinds of things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Okay, so this kind of brings us to the pinnacle of our discussion point of this topic today, because now sports are back in full swing. Lull of the summer's finally ended. We're now viewing the WNBA playoffs, college football, NFL, all at the same time. MLB playoffs, college basketball, the NBA are on the horizon. We're about to have a women's professional hockey league in 2024. Like, things are happening.
Yeah.
But what you haven't heard of, and I feel like really you haven't heard since like COVID, I just haven't heard a lot of like suspensions happening for substance use or performance enhancing drug use. So that's why I wanted to discuss this today. Is I want to know why that is. Like, are we reached a point now where drug testing has evolved so much that you're just going to get caught, so people don't do it? I definitely think there's now our culture has changed, and that now wellness is so crucial and like so important. So I think there's also just less of a desire to cheat and to use these sorts of substances when you can gain sort of the benefits from these substances naturally. But then I also wonder, like, are these sorts of substances still being developed? And then most importantly, and I know we haven't talked about it a lot, but this is kind of my own opinion. I think that there's just been a significant decrease in these sorts of suspensions, because there's been a significant decrease in the testing, banning, and sort of stigma around THC. So I think everyone kind of remembers the whole situation that happened with Brittany Griner and her detainment in Russia. There's a New York Times article that went into kind of details about that, and sort of the details around what the different professional sports organizations looked like in terms of their policies against substance use before and after COVID. And it just seems like so many of these organizations have either removed the THC testing from their drug tests, or have sort of put the responsibility on teams to like I guess discipline regulate the use of THC. And then of course different teams are going to have different policies, just as our different states have different policies. So I looked it up, and I know, like, Brittany Griner had mentioned that the reason that her and a lot of other athletes use THC is for pain management. I know I texted you last night and I was like, why can't I find any THC studies on pain management? Like, is that legit or not? And hasn't been a ton of studies on it, just because it's in a lot of places it is an illegal substance. So I think it's like you said,
nationally
it's nationally,
legal,
of course, it's still illegal. But so there's just not really funding for it. So like, I don't even really want to use the word research around this, because there really hasn't been, like, in terms of like validated like research. I think a lot of it's kind of like anecdotal, because of course, weed's been around forever, but people do cite pain management as a benefit of it. And then, just out of curiosity, I looked up, what other side effects are connected with weed, and it includes an increased heart rate, an altered sense of time, memory problems, balance problems, changes in mood. None of these symptoms or side effects, sound performance enhancing to me at all. In fact, I think they would make you a worse athlete.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know what the right answer is in terms of regulating it, or of allowing it or not allowing it, because I don't own a professional sports team, but I do think
I know you're looking to buy, though.
Yeah. It's in the 5 year
yeah. Isn't
plan.
maybe the 10-year plan, but yeah.
But anyway, that's my take. I think there's been a decoupling of substance abuse versus PED abuse. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot less suspensions. But I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think just overall, my initial thought on, if saying why PED use is decreasing, I think would be the the developments in technology and like vigilance around health and nutrition in athletes. I think nowadays they have so much information on themselves and health and sleep, and they're all wearing a Whoop, or they're wearing an Aura ring, and they're wearing what, they got the wearables, they've got the, they're sleeping in a chamber that puts them at 12,000 feet. I think there's like all these other things that they're using to quote unquote get ahead. I think they're finding there's, and like we mentioned, like steroids and performance enhancing drugs have side effects. They're not without side effects. And I think people, this is me theorizing, but if I was an athlete and, you can work hard and have all these tools at your disposal to get stronger, to get better without these side effects, it could be a better alternative. And I think too, it's a little bit of the sign of the times. I think there's a big movement around clean sport, and people are really trying to practice clean sport, avoid. And I think testing is big, and, maybe testing's gotten better or more frequent, or they're more on top of the testing, or they get, tested more often, whatever. But I think, maybe it's a little bit of the sign of the times where, like, really think about early 2000s baseball, like everybody was doing it. So like if you weren't doing it,
right,
you were falling behind. Where like nowadays you've got, maybe it's the fitness and nutrition, where if you're not doing that, you're falling behind. It's kind of a different, the playing field's just kind of shifted, where we're focusing more on health, fitness, well-being through technology and all those advances, and trainers and all the people they've hired on staffs to make their players as good as they can, all around. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of the sign of the times. I think there's like other factors. I think like, the improvement in technology and sport, I think is big, in fitness and nutrition. And then maybe I think some of it's just like a sign of the times, where like, yeah, there's like move towards clean sport. There's consequences if you don't abide by those rules. So maybe that's it too. And I think you raised a good point about the decoupling of testing of THC. I think you'd seen athletes get banned, like Sha'Carri Richardson, a track athlete, won the USA championship in the 100 meters a couple years back, and she was taken off the world's team because she tested positive for THC. And, I think, I think people, that really caused like an outrage in a lot of people, because they were like, oh, it's not a performance enhancing drug. And I think I agree with a lot of your points on like, no part of weed is like performance enhancing to me, but like, I think it can have, but I think the benefits that people cite aren't performance enhancing. They're like well-being, I don't know, like health and well-being. So, and maybe people see that as performance enhancing, but I think you have an interesting point in the decoupling, because yeah, if they're decoupling the two, yeah, maybe you're seeing fewer, because they're looking at the two, that, like, at least in my mind, there's a big difference between a performance enhancing drug and weed, or using marijuana as for whatever reason. To me,
I think it's
not
a
super
lot closer to alcohol. And
it's like recreation or relaxation,
have, strict, but strict, but like also realistic policies around alcohol.
Yeah.
Like during and during the season, as well as, in the off season. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, of course it's still illegal nationally. So that, there is that. And I don't know how you would regulate it. Like, I don't see a clean situation where like you're allowing some teams in states where it's legal to do it and others you're not. So luckily you and I don't have to really worry about that. But do you have any other...
We're not professional athletes.
Yeah, thank God.
We were close.
We were.
Yeah.
If I was just a little taller, faster, more athletic, I would have gone and played at Notre Dame.
Yeah. And I started varsity as a freshman. So they were like, yeah, she's going pro. But yeah, I just think in my mind, there's just such a big difference between like a true performance enhancing drug and weed. But that's just me. We're not the experts. We're not the ones making the decisions, unfortunately. But I think it's a thinker, and I'm curious to see where it develops in the future. I think that's I'm curious to see where it goes in the next 5-10 years, how this evolves. Because I think, it's an issue.
It'll be great for content. Do you have any final thoughts on this topic?
I think my only final thought is the question that we had in the teaser on Instagram. Is THC a performance enhancing drug in an eating competition? That's the only time I may see it as a performance enhancing drug, like in the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. But even that, I don't know. Those are athletes. They're training. They're getting those glizzies down. I think that, but I don't know. I think it's an interesting food for thought. I think potentially, you can just become a bottomless pit.
I'm going to say yes.
You say yes?
Yep. I'm saying if you're choosing to be,
I just think in terms of from a
eater,
mechanism of action, the why behind the munchies, it basically, you have no food inhibition. You're just going to eat. So I think it could be because that thing in your brain that tells you to stop eating is you've rid that. So I think it could help in performance in an eating competition. But that's a good question. I like that question. It's funny.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see what once we get more of a following, it'd be funny to hear people's takes on that.
Yeah. Well, are we on YouTube? Put it in the comments below. Comment below. Yeah. Comment below. First smash that like button and then comment below.
Exactly. All right. Well, I'm gonna get us out of here.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. We did it. It's kind of exciting.
Episode 1. That's crazy.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I promise next week, Haley and I will not talk about drugs. Or,
that is as technical as we'll get.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah. In fact, next week we might have our first interview, so that would be exciting. But we'll kind of have to wait and see how the schedule shakes out. Awesome. If you listened to this episode and thought, wow, I know someone else who would be so interested in this, our biggest ask is to please go ahead and share that with them, And then if you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening now. Heads up, we will be shouting out the best 5-star reviews on the podcast, so be as creative as you would like. If you want to catch up with what we are doing in real life or what sports we're complaining about, you can follow us on Instagram and Threads at thesportsmedpodcast. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or a compliment you want to toss our way, you can send us an email at thesportsmedpodcast@gmail.com. I'm Maddie Portland.
And I'm Haley Karpick.
And this was your weekly dose of the Sports Medicine Podcast. Cheers.